Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. Britain must be ready for war, according to the Prime Minister. But what sort of war are we now preparing for? And with whom? Britain must be ready for war. That's the conclusion of the government's Strategic Defence Review, or SDR. Launching it at a shipbuilding yard in Glasgow, the Prime Minister wasn't pulling any punches about the conflict coming our way.
Every part of society, every citizen of this country has a role to play, because we have to recognise that things have changed. In the world of today, the front line, if you like, is here. The threat we now face is more serious, more immediate, and more unpredictable than at any time since the Cold War.
You can detect a certain urgency, can't you? We need to be war ready, but to fight what sort of war? Well, a bit later, we will be taking a closer look at the changing nature of conflict. Professor Michael Clarke will be here. First, though, our defence editor, Deborah Haynes. Deborah, you've been locked in some basement somewhere with the Ministry of Defence boffins going through the detail. I mean, we've all been waiting on this review. You must be like a kid at Christmas.
Well, I must admit, as a defence journalist, I was very excited to get my hands finally on this, the Strategic Defence Review. It was launched last July by the Prime Minister, where he commissioned 3 experts to review the armed forces. Labour, in opposition, was very critical of the then government for hollowing out defence, and the Prime Minister came into power saying that this review would then set a pathway for transformation of the armed forces.
So, long awaited. Give us the detail. What's actually in the SDR?
What this is all about is transforming not just the armed forces, but the whole country to get on a war footing, to be ready for war. It talks about how right now the state of UK defences is pretty dismal. It specifically says that the UK isn't, the armed forces, they're not optimised for being able to succeed in a fight against a peer state. And it says that there are lots of things that need to be done in order to fix that. Now, some of this is new technology. So there's a section here where it talks about the need to embrace biological weapons, artificial intelligence, robotics, cyber. It's a bit kind of reminds me of Terminator with robots and AI on the battlefield. But that is a reality as we see in Ukraine. But also part of it is it's got a really historic feel to it. It's a return to a Cold War style footing where the country, society, was much more resilient. It talks about how we need to revive what's known as the strategic reserve, which is this pool of tens of thousands of veterans, people that have just left the armed forces. They're liable to come back and fight in a crisis. During the Cold War, these people, and there was a huge pool, like over maybe a couple of 100,000, maybe more actually, could come back. They were rehearsed, they were trained every year, they had kit, but that whole discipline has been lost, and this review recommends reinstating it. It also recommends growing this cadet force. There's a lot of young people in secondary school, my son is one, that go to this cadet force once a week and learn about military skills and the military. It wants to expand that significantly, also expand the volunteer reserves and increase the size of the regular armed forces. But, and there's a big but here, in the small print it has in brackets that will only happen as funding permits, and probably not until the next Parliament. So while yes, there's a lot of ambition in this document, it's also clearly contained within a financial envelope that's restricted some of the aspirations.
So Deborah, does this reshaping of our nation's defence, of our military, is it chock full of surprises, or is it met with expectation?
People that look at this document will, I think, be surprised at the honesty that's contained in here about the state of our armed forces. It talks about how there are insufficient stockpiles of weapons, how the defence procurement system is in a pretty poor state. It also has a really interesting scenario where it talks about the possible effects of war on the UK's way of life and really driving home the reality of war in the 21st century, saying that if the UK were to fight a state-on-state war as part of NATO this year, it could expect to be subject to some or all of the following methods of attack, and I'll list them for you. Attacks on the armed forces in the UK and on overseas bases. So that means attacks here in the UK on military sites, but also air and missile attack from long-range drones, cruise and ballistic missiles, the kind of thing that Ukraine suffers daily from Russia. That's things like power stations, railway lines, electricity sites, water plants. But that would absolutely have a catastrophic effect on the UK, on people's way of life. Another form of attack, increased sabotage, cyber attacks, attempts to disrupt the UK economy. It gives a sense of how war in the 21st century, it's a blend of hard military power and also these other kind of more subversive ways of coercing a country and trying to make a country bend to an opponent's will. I think that kind of detail will surprise people.
I mean, Deborah, this is clearly a moment of significance, and not least because, whilst there has been conflict taking place in numerous places around the globe, on this day, with the publication of the Strategic Defence Review, it feels very, very close to home.
It really does, and the reviewers actually they have a foreword where they really kind of spell that out, and it sort of talks about how everyone has a role to play and a national conversation on how we do it is required. These are recommendations that affect everybody and industry, even children, talking about more education in security and military in schools. It's a fundamental shift in mindset that, of course, is going to require funding from the government. The reviewers, they conducted this in the understanding that the defence budget would grow to 2.5% of GDP this Parliament. It's actually coming to that point a bit sooner in 2027 and would then expand to 3% in the next Parliament. And the reviewers say they could reach these recommendations within 10 years, but given the turbulent nature of the world, it might be the case that you'd want to do that sooner, and doing that sooner would require more money faster.
Thanks, Deborah. OK, so that's what's in the review, but what's it actually meant to do beyond keep the nation safe and all that? Professor Michael Clarke, our defence analyst, is back. Michael, according to the PM, this is all about making us war ready. But for what type of war?
So it's against any warfare, but in particular, what gives it immediacy is the feeling that we're on the road to some sort of conflict with Russia in the next few years. It may not be a war, but almost certainly, it is said, it will be a militarised conflict. The review is sort of based on the idea that there's an urgency about the Russian threat, but there's a general problem that we've got to leap into the future rather than be left behind.
So what does that future look like? I mean, we're not talking about fixing bayonets anymore, are we?
There are reasons why boots on the ground still matter, but it's a question, when do they matter? The ministry is moving towards a sort of model. It's sometimes called the 20-40-40 model. So 40% of what you do is electronic, cyber, it's drones, and you lose a lot of it. And then another 40% are the electronic and the drones that you don't want to lose, the big stuff. And then the 20% is the heavy metal and the troops who go in at the end of an engagement and occupy the ground. Sooner or later, warfare does come down to the willpower of individual people to kill and be killed, to injure and risk injury, to put themselves on the line.
So on the basis of what you've heard from the Prime Minister, from the Defence Secretary, do you think this SDR lives up to that war-ready promise?
Well, it sets Britain on a road that will get there, they hope, within, let's say, 10 years. It's a 10-year document. I mean, we're absolutely not ready now, and I don't think anybody would say that we are. And the document is intended to say this is the road down which we've got to go. Some of them are clearly costed. Some of them are aspirational and will have to be costed. This defence review scared the horses a bit, because anybody who reads it will say, well, whatever the government is saying about 2.5% of GDP to be spent on defence and 3% maybe by the end of the next Parliament, that won't be enough. At the end of the Cold War, we were spending about the same on defence as we were spending on the health service. And now we're spending about a fifth on defence as we spend on the health service. The reason that this has scared the horses is that it suggests that some pretty fundamental priority shifts will be necessary if this review is to get to where it aims to get to in 10 years' time, by 2035.
12 attack submarines, but look as well at what John Healey has said about the levels in the army. I mean, we're not expecting to see numbers there go up until the next Parliament. I mean, that gives us an idea of a shift in strategy, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean, the army numbers everyone knows, are too small. Officially, it's supposed to be 72,500. In fact, it's down at 70,000. They can't get it up to 72,500. So that's a big problem. But in terms of looking after Northern Europe and the North Atlantic, which is our strategic neighbourhood, it's the thing that we can most usefully do for our European allies, our NATO allies in Europe. So attack submarines are really useful.
Does this imply then that there's more of a regional focus to our defence now? I mean, the last defence review focused on the Indo-Pacific. I mean, this seems to be focused, as you were saying there, Atlantic and to the east.
Yeah, dead right, Neil. This is much more about our neighbourhood. And whereas the last review certainly didn't neglect Europe, but it didn't say enough about it, this review is based, I think, on a very clear idea. It's NATO first, and that's written into the review, because the North Atlantic and Northern Europe is the area where we've got to safeguard our interests.
One of the hangovers from the Cold War is our nuclear deterrent, on which we will be spending 15 billion quid. I mean, what is the logic of that, given it is the one item we have never used and it is the one item we never hope to use?
If all else failed, if we were facing nuclear annihilation, let's say by Russia, and the Russians threaten it on their Russia programs almost every once a week or so. But if we were faced with that, they would know that the British independent deterrent can hit back, and whatever they could do, it would easily destroy Moscow. Easily.
Is it so smart these days? I mean, it's a huge amount of money, and a huge amount of money that could be spent really, really quickly elsewhere.
We let the development of nuclear warheads drift away in the atomic weapons establishment, and we lost a lot of people, expertise. We actually just don't have the expertise. So they're having to put a lot more money in now, surprise, surprise. You're back to the old idea is that the money that we spend on the deterrent, which over a 40 or 50-year life of the deterrent is about 4 or 5% of the defence budget. So it's not huge.
Right, okay.
But it does hurt at the moment because we're in the peak spending years.
This review is all about NATO first. What does that mean?
NATO, in a sense, is more important to Britain than ever before. NATO is even more important now because of President Trump. It is even more important that the Europeans understand the centrality of NATO, because none of us are big enough to stand up, say, to Russia on our own, because the Russians are just so much bigger. But collectively, the European nations are 10 times richer than Russia, 12 times, in fact. So there's no reason why we can't stand up to Russia if we had to, as long as we are collectively sensible.
So if warfare has dramatically changed from that Cold War period, just walk me through it. What does war now look like?
And so it's warfare now that's across the whole spectrum, from things our grandfathers and great-grandfathers would have understood to things which only our grandchildren will fully understand. It is also the maturity of air power, not just aircraft, but robotics and drones.
We've just seen them being used to great effect in Russia by the Ukrainians, haven't we?
Yeah, the spider's web attack, which is up there with the Israeli attack on Hezbollah using exploding pagers. I mean, just as a technical achievement, it's phenomenal, actually, what the Ukrainians have managed to do. And that will be a wake-up call to the Russians as well in the clever use of drones. If you can digitize the battlefield using AI, then you do an awful lot without using troops on the ground. And a future battlefield will seem to be quite deserted for long periods because everything that's happening will be going on in space, in cyber, with AI, and with rear area attacks and disruption.
So how close are we to that war? I mean, is this too little too late, or am I being daft and we're already in it?
We are already suffering cyber attacks. I mean, several thousand cyber attacks, every year. I mean, launched, we know, by Russia and by groups that Russia sponsors, trying to disrupt our system. The Ukrainians, they get an attack literally every day. Cyber attacks, sabotage, at least 12 of our internet cables have been cut in the Baltic in the last 15 months. By ours, I mean North Europeans, NATO cables.
Sure. So we're in a kind of permanent state of conflict then?
Permanent state of incipient conflict, yeah. It hasn't broken out from our point of view yet into outright killing or bombing. but we're not so far away from it. And the argument of the Defence Review, again, is that the best way to avoid getting ourselves into that shooting war is to deter it. Mm-hmm. And to deter it, you've got to be prepared to fight it. You've got to have the equipment to fight it and show the other side that you've got the will to do so, psychological as well as physical.
Have we recognised that too late then?
Well, it's certainly late. It may not be too late. What the armed forces are saying is, look, we can make pretty good progress within, let's say, from 2027 to 2035. The danger period is the next 2 to 3 years, when whatever we invest now will not pay off for a little while. But the public won't see much benefit for all this money being put into defence. They won't see much change for 2 to 3 years.
Thanks, Michael. To read more of Michael and Deborah's analysis, just head straight to the website, skynews.com. And a heads up that Deborah has a new podcast series on the way, taking the form of a war game simulating a Russian attack on the UK. She's brought together former ministers and military chiefs to take on an imaginary Kremlin. The war game starts on the 10th of June, so keep an ear out for that. The Sky News Daily is back again tomorrow.